Hello, welcome to Gardener's World. I looked out the window this morning and there was really quite a hard frost. The whole garden was silvery, with all the plants bent and hunched against the cold. And it is a reminder that don't get overexcited and put out all your tender plants just because we have a bit of sunshine. We can still have some cold weather. That doesn't mean to say, though, there isn't plenty to do. On today's show, we head to the Norfolk coast to meet a couple who have created their tropical paradise adorned with scrap metal washed up on the beach. And we visit a passionate gardener in Cheshire who has turned his small back garden into a vibrant jungle. Now, these bean sticks are all part of planting out sweet peas. It's that time. I sowed them in January and February and March to get succession, and I try and put them out as early as I can without risking damaging them. It's always a fine line. They are much hardier than you might think, and I like to grow sweet peas in a border, in amongst all the plants. Now, to do that, I grow them up bean sticks. If you have bean sticks that can be 8 foot tall, you get a big wind, they can blow over, taking the sweet peas with them. So just make holes to sink the sticks in. There we go. Right, let's get the sticks. I like the irregularities you get from these sticks, but of course you can get bamboos very easily and they are much more regular. And because I've made the holes, these are easy to put in. Get that in nice and securely. Right, the next stage is to tie them at the top. That is now a good solid support to take my sweet peas, and of course it works just as well for clematis or any annual climber that you choose to grow. This is a variety called Painted Lady. It's one of my favourites. The flowers are bicolour, pink and white, and this has one of the most wonderful fragrances of any sweet pea you can grow. You can see that I've grown these in root trainers, which allows that long tap root to grow a little bit longer than it would in a plug. When you buy sweet peas already growing, and you haven't sown them yourself, you get a pot that is crammed with little sweet pea plants. So I would suggest you break the pot up into 2 or 3 pieces and plant each piece at the base of the support. Now, sweet peas are amongst the greediest and hungriest plants you will ever grow in your garden. The key to success is a really rich soil that holds plenty of moisture. If you've got very sandy soil or it's a new garden, a good idea is to dig out a pit. Put it about half full of compost or manure, put soil back in and plant into that. And you'll find that you will get twice as many flowers for twice as long as a result. Now, what you need to do at this point is, if you haven't already, is pinch them out. And that encourages side shoots, and they bear the flowers, and also a nice, strong plant. Once they start growing strongly, they will need tying in for about the first month or so. And then they will have tendrils that will attach on their own accord. But what is absolutely essential is to give them a good water. Sweet peas thrive in mild, cool, damp conditions. If it's too hot and dry, they don't like it at all. So give them a really good weekly soak. Now, the key to growing any annual climber in a border, and particularly sweet peas, is to go with the theme. And obviously here in the cottage garden, it is soft pastel colours. But last summer, we went to Norfolk to visit a garden that certainly went with its theme, but in a very different way.
The house in the garden is called Súl na Mara, which is Gaelic for in sight of the sea. The sea's about 5 minutes in that direction. We've lived here for nearly 13 years now. When we moved here, we were kind of inspired by the coast, things that we found on the beach. We wanted something tropical. We wanted something that incorporated the rust and the coastline, and hopefully that's what we've achieved. When we first moved here, there was very little in the garden. There was some roses, some shrubs. There were no trees at all. There was concrete everywhere. Over the years, we ended up with something like 15 skips worth of rubbish out of the garden. So we had pretty much a blank canvas. I didn't sit down and draw out what you see now. We did it bit by bit. I've always been fascinated by rust and decay. And obviously the beaches here, because of the sea defences, there's lots of things to be found in the beaches, particularly after storms. There's old railway lines. There's the old lighthouse, which was demolished years and years ago. So there's lots of things to be found in the beach. We've found an old oil can, in which we've planted up. I've found, I think it's a clutch, part of a clutch from a car, which just looked decorative, and we've put that in the side of the shed. We're in North Norfolk coast, so the soil is essentially sand, very free draining. Tropical plants do really well. We have 225 varieties of plants in the garden. Quite a lot of them are exotic.
As you come into our garden, the first thing you'll see is the height of the trees and just this huge expanse of green. And you'll follow the path through to two borders and walk past a little sunroom that Bill's made. And then you come to the next section, which is completely different, which is really based on metal.
We've incorporated a lot of the things we've found into the garden. For example, we have a water feature, which was fortunate that it came off the beach. These came from a farm, local farm. I think there's some kind of animal feeding trough, but we've planted them up with Echeveria and Ipomoea. And the bamboo at the back here just softens the hard edges of the metal. So these big bits of metal here, I find them architectural, particularly when you've got holes like that in them. I think it goes well with the planting, and in this case you've got formal box hedge planting. It's just the colour and the rust and the hard angular edges of the steel. I love rust, as you can probably tell. People get a bit scared about, they hear exotic, they think, oh, you can't grow exotic in Britain. Well, I think this garden proves the point that you can, and we work on the principle that if it doesn't grow, then we'll try something else. These are some of my favourite varieties in the garden. These are agaves. We've got a number of them here in this part of the garden, but my particular favourite is this one. This is Agave Americana alba. And the alba botanically refers to the white colouring on this plant, but strangely, you may have gathered I'm a Scot, alba in Gaelic is the word for Scotland. They are a desert plant from places like Mexico, so they're used to hot, sunny conditions, but what they don't like is getting wet. If the roots get waterlogged, they just turn to mush. So in the winter, smaller plants like this will be taken out of the container and put into a pot, and we overwinter these smaller ones in the greenhouse.
I'd say my favourite plant in the garden is my Indian bean tree, which I've waited 13 years to come to full flower. And this year it's done it, and it has been beautiful. I walk around my garden every morning before I go to work with a cup of tea, and I just love every single bit of it. And it's very hard when you see it all done to actually think, we did this. We did this. And I love every bit of it.
I really like that rust theme. And it does show that it doesn't matter what your basic theme is, whether you use plants or metal or stone or wood, stick with it. Keep it simple. And interesting that it's so sandy. It's that defines the plants in the garden. So it doesn't matter what you want to do with your garden or what theme you choose, you've got to listen to your soil. I'm putting in an eye to support a wire, which in turn will support this rose. And you need really good, strong support because roses can be quite heavy. And this is an expanding bolt, so that goes in there like that. And then as I tighten it, it'll open out and fill the cavity. There we go. Now, the key thing is to get this really tight. And to that end, these are pretty much essential. They're strainers, and what they give you is some leeway to tighten. Now, before you use them, open them right out so that gap is full of air. And then, as you tighten them, the wire will stretch. So that hooks on, and what you need to do is take the strain and then bend it back. And just wind it round. Now just tighten it a little. There we go. I think that's enough. So I've got the support in. Now this is an east-facing wall. And at this time of year, that can be a real problem because you have frost overnight. And then the sun breaks through, hits an east wall, and essentially burns up these frosted petals. And that's when you see, particularly, for example, a camellia. If it's on an east wall, very often will get browned by the morning sun after frost. But the rose that I've planted here, Madame Alfred Carrière, is very happy on an east wall. It's got wonderful white, pale pink blooms that flower very early. It should flower in May and go on flowering right through the summer. So the next step is to take this unruly growth, which is only a couple of years old, and train it so we have a good structure. What I'm looking for is nice, strong growth from as low down as possible. But the last thing I want it to do is to be upright, because the flowering shoots grow best if they're growing vertically. So the more horizontal the permanent support is, the better the flowering shoots will grow. Right, that one can go over there, like that. I'll just gently tie that in. One tip is if you want a stem to grow out longer, don't tie down the final 6 inches, because plants always grow much more vigorously if they're growing up. Leave it loose, it'll grow up, and then tie it down, but leave the last bit until you reach the point that you want to, which is the end of the wire. Then you can tie it right down. I need to take out any of the stems that are not attached. So, for example, this whole stem I can cut like that, and this can go like that. Right, I'm going to stop there because I think that's the best that I can do for the moment. But it has taken what was a vigorous sprawl of a rose into something that has the potential for becoming a good, solid framework. And the flowers are going to be absolutely heavenly. It's always satisfying when you make what would otherwise be an awkward space or aspect into something that's a real positive virtue. And it doesn't matter how small your garden is or how awkward it seems to be initially. There will always be something you can do, and sometimes it's an opportunity to do something truly remarkable. As we discovered last August, when we went up to Runcorn to visit Derek Ferguson, who has transformed his own garden.
When people tend to come around the garden, hopefully the first thing they say is wow. And then they say, oh, it's so jungly. And that is such a compliment because that's the design, that's the style I go for. And considering it's such a small space, it's quite difficult to achieve that. It works really well, I think. Big exotic plants look good in a small space. A few years ago, we went on holiday to Norfolk, and I'd heard about a garden in Norwich city centre, and it was just breathtaking. The size, the scale, plants you just wouldn't dream would grow in our British climate. Could I possibly do this type of style in my garden? That gave me sort of the impetus to at least give it a go. Initially, it was a cottage garden, and so I needed to remove the more cottagey plants and to introduce more tropical plants. Friends were very grateful because a lot of the plants which wouldn't have fitted into the style, things like delphiniums and lupins, my friends got. I want things to look natural. That might sound contradictory, sitting in Runcorn in a tropical garden. One of my favourite plants is the Tetrapanix. It's the most tropical looking plant. The nickname is T-Rex, and rightly so. The leaves are palmate and can be a metre in diameter. When you stand under it, it envelops you. It's totally hardy. It is deciduous. You'll lose all the leaves in the autumn. I tend to hang things from it. I've even been known to put tinsel around it at Christmas. I've got a habit of buying palms. I've got 44. My favourite genus of palm is Trachycarpus. I've not got them all, but I'm working on it. Some I might have to thin them out eventually. Again, friends and family will benefit from that. The tender bananas I grow at Ensete, there's a purple one called Morellii. You can buy it as a plug, and in just a short space of time, it will grow sort of 6-8 feet. But it's totally tender. It won't take a temperature lower than 3. But if you dry it off in October, you cut all the leaves off. It's a large pseudostem, so it's packed with water. If you tip it upside down, put it in a shed or an outbuilding for a few weeks so all the water drains out, and then you can put it in your loft, wrap it in a bit of hessian, and just leave it for 6 months. In late March, put it in some compost, give it a bit of water, and away you go again. One plant I bought recently is a plant called Snecchio, angel wings. It's a very touchy-feeling plant. It's purely decorative, but it's a very sensual plant as well. The Heliopsis is a survivor from my cottage garden. In fact, it's one of the oldest plants in the garden. I don't plant much yellow, but I think the zestiness and the vibrancy of the yellow just helps it stand out. In the last few years, I've started growing dahlias. I wouldn't have touched dahlias 5 years ago, but now I can't believe I ever live without them. My partner's always telling me I plant too much, but with gardening, I like instant impact. And in some respects, although I do grow some things from seed, I like the fix now. The water is a major feature in the garden. On the top tier, I used to have a large Fatsia japonica. When I removed it, the crater it created just cried out to be used. So I got a liner and filled it with water and created a wildlife pond. You imagine in a jungle effect, there's always a stream running through it, and with the big plants around it. It's just a nice calming effect. The garden builds to a colour crescendo. I love Tithonium. It starts to flower in July, just pumps out hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of flowers. And providing you don't get a heavy frost, it can be flowering at Christmas. That doesn't often happen, but you can still get a good array of colours. It's been a challenge, but I love creating the space. It's nice, it wraps around you, you know, like a blanket of colour and foliage and texture. And when I come here at the end of a busy day in work, I sit on the large settee in the conservatory. It's almost like a chaise lounge. I relax out and I put my arm over and I glance out into my paradise. I just find it very peaceful.
Derek is absolutely right about making a small space seem bigger if you put in big plants. If you put masses of small plants into a small garden, it makes it feel cluttered and somehow less space. But one or two really big, dramatic plants makes everything seem bigger. I know it's counterintuitive, but it works. Now, this space here is the most exciting thing in the garden for me at the moment, because last year I decided that we should let the grass grow long. We planted in snake's head fritillaries as bulbs, leucojum, which is a summer snowflake, and it's really exciting to take a space that has been the same for year after year and transform it, and it's absolutely thrilling. There are many luxuries of having a potting shed, but the best of all is when it's raining outside and you can come in and it's dry and warm and you can stay here all day. Now, what I'm going to do, now I'm in here, is sow some perennials. We often sow annual vegetables or flowers, and it's a really good way of growing them. But I guess that not so many people feel like growing perennial plants from seed, and yet it's really easy to do. And it saves you a lot of money. I'm going to sow two types in particular. The first is called Gaura lindemii, and it has tall spikes of flower. And in a hot summer, it will flower from June right through to the autumn. So this is a variety called the Bride, which is the most common that you'll find. Here are the seeds, which are quite a good size. If I just try and spread them reasonably evenly. The better the spacing with seeds, the better they will grow. And there's absolutely no virtue in oversowing. I'm going to press that down. And the reason I press it down is not to compact the compost, but just to push the seeds so there's good contact. Now I'm just going to cover the seeds lightly with some vermiculite. You can sieve over the top, but this will do the job just as well. The vermiculite, as well as blocking some light, plays quite an important role in stopping them drying out. Now, another perennial, which I love, is Aquilegia. Aquilegias are absolutely beautiful, and you can get them in pure white, you can get rich, dark burgundy colours, and all shades in between. But the problem is that they do hybridize very, very freely. So you will find, as time goes on, the colours of your Aquilegias will get more muddy. So by growing them from seed every year, you re-inject pure colour, if you like. And this is a good example. I've got this lovely lime sorbet, which is white flushed with green, which I want for the writing garden, and then completely different ruby port for the jewel garden, which is really intense and dark. And they'll behave very differently to the Gaura, because these may take up to 10 weeks to germinate. You then transplant the young seedlings, grow them on, and you could plant them out in autumn or pot them up and keep them in a cold frame or a cool greenhouse over winter and plant them out next March. Because these are very slow to germinate, unless you are meticulous about your watering regime, there is a risk of the seeds drying out before they germinate, and then they won't happen at all. So by covering them, you reduce that risk. Now, these acrolegias are a slow burn. However, the Gaura are a completely different kettle of fish. I want these to flower this summer. And to do that, they need as much heat right now as possible. I'm going to put this on here because this mat is warm. If I water them and keep them watered, I would expect to see these appear in about 10 days' time. And you can see next to them, I've got the Spanish flag that I sowed earlier in the year. They're ready to prick out. And next to those are some Thalictrum that I sowed last September. They're almost ready to prick out, and it's all part of growing perennials on a grand scale by using seed. But if I can't persuade you to sow some flowers, here are some other jobs for this weekend. Daffodils are starting to form the bulb for next year's flowers as soon as this one's fade. But so that all the energy of the plant can go into forming as good a flower as possible, snap off the seed heads as you see them, but leave the stems and the leaves to die back naturally. The vivid colour of the stems of dogwood are one of the highlights of the winter garden. But now that the new leaves are starting to appear, it's time to cut them back hard. This will stimulate fresh growth and extra bright colour for the bleak midwinter next year. If, like me, you like to grow melons, now is the time to sow them. I put 2 seeds to a 3-inch pot and then intend to remove the weaker of the seedlings as they appear. They do need some heat, so if you haven't got a heated greenhouse, put them on a windowsill above a radiator. And if you don't grow melons, this procedure applies equally for cucumbers. This is the Magnolia Black Tulip that I planted a few weeks ago. And you can see it is in flower. But they are quite susceptible to frost damage. And there is cold weather forecast for tonight. So I'm just going to put a bit of fleece over the top. I'm just simply making a little microclimate. Shrouded, but protected. Well, that's it for this week. It's been a funny old day, and I hope the weather's a bit better this weekend wherever you are, but I'll be back next week, rain or shine. And for Good Friday, Easter weekend, we're back to the full 1 hour. And that does mean that we start half an hour earlier at 8 o'clock. So I'll see you then. Bye-bye.